Mega Man is one of the first series that your average person thinks of when you mention classic consoles like the NES or SNES. The series was incredibly innovative, and for the time, incredibly well designed. So many new and engaging concepts came from the first few Mega Man titles, which changed the way a lot of future games were developed. The non-linearity, the ability to steal weapons from the bosses, the run-and-gun combat, the lack of permanent game over screens, the blueness of the main character. You know what? It was really innovative, okay? For me, though, as a totally rad 90s bro, it was Mega Man X that really took that formula to a whole new level. While classic Mega Man focused mostly on static platforming challenges that could really only be tackled in one way, or else straight up skipped with the right tools, Mega Man X added a wealth of depth through simple mechanical additions, like the dash and dash jump, the ability to charge boss weapons, and the option to grip and jump up walls. These additions transformed the way players could approach the levels and challenges, as well as the way the levels and challenges themselves could be designed. Upgrades like rush adapters and items were greatly improved upon in X as well, through the creation of armor upgrades. Instead of replacing abilities or giving you an extra option with a niche use, armor upgrades often supplemented your existing moves by adding depth to them. Add in heart tanks and refillable energy tanks, and X games were always full of secrets to find that added to your arsenal. Tons of sequels later, and we only realistically got a small handful of games from the X series that really understood the magic of the original. Oh, there were endless great ideas for improvements in the sequels, but very few of the games actually capitalized on these ideas. In fact, most were a mess. Luckily, most of the worst X games were also forced into the inescapable black hole that is Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2, so nobody ever has to recognize these exist again. Given that Mega Man 11 came out last year and did rather well, I thought it would be fun to imagine what a Mega Man X9 could look like if done well, particularly because, let's be real, they're making it right now. It could be announced any day at this point, so what ideas would they bring back? What new ideas would they come up with? How would they stay faithful to the best of the series while still making a game that feels fresh and interesting in its own ways? Firstly, I think we should talk about some of the bigger picture stuff, and what's more bigger picture than the picture itself, the graphics. X9 could be made to look like a ton of other games in the series. We've got the 16-bit era titles with their chunky pixel art, the slightly less chunky pixel art and CG backgrounds of the 32-bit titles, the 3D titles on PS2, Maverick Hunter X, or what about something more modern? Maybe it could look like Mega Man 11 with that high-res, cel-shaded 3D look. Personally, I think that Mega Man 11 looks great in a lot of ways, outside of a few who fell asleep at their keyboard quality character animations. It could work rather well for X9, but I always imagined that modern X titles would instead be 2D, with a hand-drawn aesthetic, something that looks like Indivisible or like Cuphead in a modern anime style. I imagine it looking like the promotional art that we all know and love that's used for the game sleeves, menus, posters, etc., if it had suddenly sprung to life. There's also the question of what characters we'd be able to play as. X3 and every later title gave us the option to play as Zero, and starting with X7 they threw Axel into the mix. Well, that's cool and everything, and I'm sure a lot of people would probably really want to play as Zero at least. I think X9 should stick to just X himself. It would be awesome to at least be able to play through the game as Zero, obviously. But if we're imagining this as a real, practical project, it's important that the game is focused and polished, so we don't want to aim too broad. Balancing the game for all three playstyles on top of all of X's armor upgrades and any other extras could be too much. I'd want X9 to feel as fair and precisely designed as X1 or X4 generally are, so let's focus on making X the best he can be instead. I think the game should also come with a training mode, which kind of resembles Rookie Hunter mode in the X Legacy collection, but with a bit more challenge. Which, yes, you might have noticed that my X2 and X3 footage is using Rookie Hunter, mostly because I don't want to deal with their bull right now. I'm good at MegaMan X, I swear. Rookie Hunter often deals out so little damage that some bosses and most normal enemies can't even hurt you. It's less an easy mode and more of an accessibility mode, honestly. They've done easy modes better in the past, like in the Mega Man Anniversary collection. I understand how difficult Mega Man games can be for first-time players, and how valuable an easier mode can be for getting players used to what the game expects of you. Heck, I'm not afraid to admit that the only reason I was able to beat games like Mega Man 1 or Mega Man 10 on normal is because I had access to easier modes first. So toss one in X9 too. Speaking of tossing things in, X9 should also bring back some of the cool little spicy quirks that added character to the previous games. One must-have inclusion would be the stage transformations that occur if the player has beaten a specific Maverick beforehand, similar to X1. It's really cool to be able to play stages like Flame Mammoths in two drastically different ways, with different hazards and aesthetics, and Mavericks being affected by weapons that aren't their weakness is also an addition I'd love to see return. Little things like that really add a lot of character to the game, and build it out so that it feels more like an adventure. Still, a Mega Man title is nothing without great bosses, and powers to gain from those bosses. The weakness order and how bosses react to the weapons they're weak to give players a fun puzzle to solve on their first playthrough, and then future playthroughs can retain the fun by offering players meaningful reasons to break that order. Bosses should always be fun and engaging to fight with the X-Buster itself, and while they should be easier when you're armed with their weakness, Spark Mandrill Syndrome should be kept to a minimum. Generally, players still want to fight the bosses on later playthroughs, not spend 2 minutes watching them struggle to escape stun animations. I also think the series should focus on giving the Mavericks unique quirks that make the fights themselves meaningfully different from each other. We'll see a few examples of that later, so let's just jump in and take a look at a few of the Maverick ideas I came up with. First up is the least dangerous of the bunch, the chill penguin of the group, Poison Platypus. Instead of making Poison Platypus a normal stage Maverick, I think it'd be worth putting him at the end of the intro stage. Starting with X2, the intro stages always ended with rather lame bosses. They may have been impressive graphically for the time, but they didn't usually have story significance like Vile did in X1. They were never really interesting to fight either, and were usually far too easy. Poison Platypus could by contrast be a normal Maverick fight. He could feel fleshed out and complex like a real boss, and when defeated, he'd drop his own weapon, starting the weakness chain automatically and giving new players just a bit of a head start. Still, we don't want to lock returning players into doing things in the same order every time, so the intro stage could also include an alternative path that's quite a bit more difficult, but allows you to skip Poison Platypus. This would make the game feel more like all the previous Mega Man games, where you have to beat the normal stage Mavericks of your choice to start the weakness chain. We could actually do something cool with this too. Imagine if by skipping Platypus and making it to the first Sigma stage at the end of the game, you had the option to fight a more powerful version of him instead, and when you beat him, you could gain access to the game's secret piece of super equipment or something, akin to the Hadouken, Shoryuken, or Hyper Armor from the first 3 titles. That would further give returning players reasons to take the harder route through the game by skipping Platypus. We can talk about the special piece of equipment he'd offer later, but for now, let's discuss some of the other bosses in a bit more detail. Firstly, I think we need at least one boss that's a direct callback to an earlier title, so meet Express Elephant. Despite his size, Express Elephant is a deceptively fast enemy who focuses on dashing through his foes. He's weak to Poison Platypus's Poison Bubble, which will slowly chip away at his health for a few seconds when you hit him with it. As an homage to X1, it'd be cool if you could use the weapon from another boss to chop off Express Elephant's trunk, which could double the damage Poison Bubble causes. Beating Express Elephant would give X the Express Tackle, which is a dash move that gives X invincibility frames and a damaging hitbox that knocks away any enemies it doesn't kill. And why can't we just use it in the air and on the ground? That way it could therefore be useful as both a weapon and a movement option. Volcanic Tigress is a fiery warrior known for melting her enemies into a puddle of molten metal. Though she seems cool and collected at first, she loves to fight dirty, often pinning her enemies down and then vomiting hot magma onto them. She can also create red-hot claws and swing them chaotically at her enemies. She too could be damaged by a weapon that's not her weakness. Maybe it could cause her to overheat internally, forcing her to expel all the magma in her body to survive. This could prevent her from using any of her magma attacks, including the vomit, forcing her to rely exclusively on her claws. The more of these outlier effects from different weapons we have, the more reasons players might have to break the weakness chain and form their own route. For beating Volcanic Tigress, X would gain access to the Volcanic Volley, a projectile that could hit enemies for damage or splash on a surface, leaving dangerous magma in the area for a few seconds. I think it'd be cool if it could be aimed like the Metal Blade from Mega Man 2 as well, giving it some precision versatility. Moving on, Arctic Ape is a massive, angry monkey that loves to summon blizzards that create berms of snow to change the shape of his arena. The blizzard could also coat the ground in slippery ice as well as spawn glowing snowflakes that'll slow X down for a few seconds, I guess. Other than this, I think Arctic Ape would primarily use brute force to smash his enemies into a pile of wires and metal. Obviously, he'd be weak against Tigress's weapon, Volcanic Volley, which aside from doing critical damage, could melt all of the slowing snowflakes before they reach X, and could also be used to melt the snow berms in your way, so you as a player can control the shape of the battlefield, rather than Arctic Ape doing so. For defeating Arctic Ape, X would gain access to the Arctic Avalanche, which is a blizzard that slows all enemies on screen for a few seconds. If charged, Arctic Avalanche could create a much fiercer blizzard, which would also fill any bottomless pits nearby and cover any spikes in the area, allowing X to safely explore without worry of instant death. Endless Salamander is the final Maverick of the bunch we'll look at. I wish I could have called him Split Salamander, but there's already a mushroom with that name. Salamander relies largely on his enemies' mistakes to overwhelm them. How? Well, I'd imagine Salamander's tail could be knocked off in a shower of sparks if you hit it instead of the rest of his body. The tail could then turn into a clone that acts on its own, and takes a few hits to destroy. I see no reason to limit the amount of clones the player could spawn if they're reckless, so we'd need a really long open arena to fight in. The cool thing is, if you didn't hit Salamander's tail, he wouldn't spawn clones, bringing a risk/reward dynamic into the battle that the player's in control of. And again, maybe X could optionally hit Salamander with a weapon that's not his weakness, which could permanently sever his tail, preventing clones. What about armor and other upgrades though? An X game is only so different from classic Mega Man if you don't have great upgrades to find, especially the armor set. So I came up with a design which I've decided to title the Wave Armor. Firstly, the helmet upgrade could give X slightly quicker charge times for his X-Buster, and it would be even cooler is if the charge time could be further decreased whenever X is in the air. I think it would also be useful if on top of this, the player gains access to an optional effect that can be toggled on or off, which allows for auto-charging of the X-Buster. This effect would automatically charge the Buster without holding the button down. Pressing it once would release the current blast, and holding the button would fire basic pellet shots. Your thumbs will thank me. On top of the usual boost to defense, I think the chest piece could place boosters on X's back that extend his dash range. But skilled players could also be given one other option to use, which I call the enemy launch. If X makes contact with an enemy and the player presses jump at the right time, they could avoid damage by jump boosting off of the enemy. This could obviously be combined with the dash to dash jump off of enemies. Stages would generally have to be more open vertically to accommodate for this change, but it'd be totally worth it. And the best part is, using the enemy launch in combination with the helmet upgrade could could allow for near instantaneous X-Buster charging, as long as X could stay off the ground. This ability would be high skill, high reward. Mechanics like this add a lot of longevity to a title, and would be amazing for speedrunners. Don't even try to tell me you wouldn't watch a speedrun where the entire run is done without touching the ground. The X-Buster upgrade, beyond just being a bigger, more destructive weapon that also allows players to charge Maverick weapons, could temporarily cover enemies it doesn't kill in an electric substance that allows X to regain just a bit of weapon energy if he's nearby, I guess. Nothing too drastic because the blast itself would be the main interest point. Finally, the foot upgrade could let X stick to a wall rather than slide down it, though it would obviously be best if the player could still choose to slide down the walls if they want, maybe by holding toward the wall and diagonally down on the D-pad. The boots could also make it so that X doesn't slide around on ice. So, remember how I said that players could optionally skip Poison Platypus in the intro stage, and then defeat him later in a secret area near the start of the first Sigma stage? I thought it'd be cool if this gave X something called the Morph Buster. The Morph Buster would have infinite ammo like the normal Buster, but would only do a single point of damage to enemies. However, if a boss is defeated with it, X could gain a new minor upgrade. This could include mini-bosses, non-Maverick bosses, and even Sigma himself. Defeating Maverick bosses would give X infinite ammo for the weapon corresponding with that boss, and maybe another bonus. Other bosses could give you toggleable abilities from past games, like the residual plasma effect from X4 or the temporary defense boost chip from X3. And new effects could be included too, like the removal of the 3-shot limit for your basic pellets. To go along with this though, I think a New Game Plus mode would be warranted. It could give enemies and bosses more attacks that do more damage, make stages slightly more hazardous, and allow X to start the game with any upgrades he'd previously collected. Other options like a speedrun timer, boss rush mode, challenges for specific mechanics, and more could be fairly easy to implement but add tons of replay value. The dynamism, variety, and secrets of the X titles when at their best has always been what made the series unique. MegaMan X has huge amounts of depth when firing on all cylinders, so it's no wonder people still play it so much today. We all want X9 to be the best game in the series when it is finally released, and I think the smartest way to make that happen is by focusing on making the movement options, weapons, and choices the players have access to as meaningful as possible. It needs to be a game people can happily play for 3 more decades. I have loads of other ideas for this that I didn't want to detail here, including a full list of Mavericks to fight, weapons to use and their effects, and more. So if you guys want to hear more about this, let me know with a like and a comment below, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video sometime that details everything. If you know anyone else who's a huge MegaMan X fan, share the video with them so maybe we can get their input too. Let's start a conversation about this. Until then, what did you guys think? Do any of these ideas sound good to you? What new ideas do you have that didn't get mentioned here? What old favorites would you want to see return? If you have anything else to add or change, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.